All right, I think we'll get this started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Welcome. My name is Johanna Lawton. I am the Deputy Director at Rebuild by Design. And on behalf of our team at Rebuild, I really would like to thank you all for joining us this evening for our second event of the Building Resilience in New Jersey speaker series. We are so thrilled this evening to be joined by two very special guests, Nick Angarone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer, and Kate Boicourt, Director of Climate Resilient Coasts and Watersheds at the Environmental Defense Fund. But before I hand it over to our guests, I do want to start with a couple of notes about tonight and also set the stage a little bit for why we're here. Just so you know, we will be hearing from Nick Angarone in a little bit, who will then be joined by Kate in a discussion, and we'll have a Q&A at the very end. So if you have questions that come up throughout the evening, I really encourage you to put them in the Q&A chat function. And to give us a little bit of more context about this discussion and why we're here, I first want to share a little bit more about Rebuild by Design and our work. Our story begins in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and Rebuild by Design was originally launched as a design competition by the federal government to rebuild the Sandy-impacted region in a way that would restore communities and also mitigate risks to future impacts from climate change. This competition that was launched culminated in 7 winning projects around the region, and the initial investment of $1 billion now has helped rise over $4.3 billion in climate infrastructure projects throughout this region. But more specifically, and probably of more interest to you all who are in attendance this evening, we actually have 2 projects that are now in implementation in New Jersey, including in Hoboken, where we have the Resist, Delay, Store, Discharge project to protect the city against storm surge and flash floods, enhancing community resilience and climate-driven hazards, as well as in the New Meadowlands, which is a project that restores and strengthens the Meadowlands' natural wetlands and upland landscapes to reduce flood risk, improve water quality, and safeguard adjacent neighborhoods from increasingly severe storms. And since the original competition, Rebuild by Design has broken off from the federal government and is now housed at the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University, where we still do regional design competitions and place-based initiatives, but we also do a lot of research, policy, advocacy, and project planning. And tonight, I really want to speak with you all about that work that we are doing nationally, and particularly because it's the impetus for this series. Most recently, Rebuild has been working on a research compendium that looks at disaster impacts at the county level across the entire United States. And this summer, we were able to update our research with an interactive tool that shows this county level disaster impact data with a congressional overlay. And we're really excited tonight to introduce to you the 2024 update to this data, which quite starkly shows that there have been 99 disasters in the past year alone, and 46 new counties experienced their first disaster in the time frame that we are looking at since 2011. And we really want this to sort of set the stage for the discussion about climate impacts and solutions that we are hoping to drive through this educational series. Most interesting, I think, from this analysis of our data, we have actually found that 92.4% of counties have experienced a recent major disaster due to extreme weather. And that also includes 99.5% of congressional districts who have experienced a recent major disaster. And within that data, you can definitely see that New Jersey is home to many communities that are experiencing these impacts. Recently, New Jersey has experienced 14 federally declared major disasters due to extreme weather, costing taxpayers over $7.9 billion in federal post-disaster assistance. This ranks New Jersey 6th in the nation for the most FEMA support per capita, and every county has had at least 5 recent major disasters. 12 counties have had at least 7 federal disasters, and Morris County in New Jersey has had the highest number of disasters in the state at 9 disasters. But we know that many of you are not here tonight just because you want to hear about the risks and the hazards and the harms and to feel that sense of alarm. We're also here to talk about solutions and to think about what New Jersey is already doing to combat these impacts. So Rebuild by Design, in particular, is an advocate of establishing resilient sources of infrastructure funding at the state level. And we really believe that states can step up, particularly in this moment where we are seeing federal sources of funding for post-disaster assistance and resilient infrastructure on the chopping block. And we need to start shifting our thinking to what the states can do to establish sustainable sources of resilient infrastructure. Really quickly, I just want to touch on 2 ways that we are thinking about it at Rebuild by Design. One is an environmental bond act or a voter initiative that we're seeing a lot of states and communities across the country establish, such as California, and quite recently in New York State, where Rebuild helped provide the research and support to advocate for an environmental bond act for ecological resilience and climate adaptation, which actually passed with really strong voter support in the state. And then also to see this as an opportunity to establish really good, well-paying jobs for residents. In New York State, for example, the Environmental Bond Act is estimated to create 84,000 jobs. And we believe this is an example that we can learn from for New Jersey and other states. Similarly, we also are very excited about opportunities to leverage insurance as a tool to raise funds to create a sustainable source of state-level funding for resilient infrastructure. And we are seeing states across the country, including Vermont, Washington, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Connecticut, beginning to look to these mechanisms. And one that we are particularly interested in is a small surcharge on property and casualty insurance, which could raise over, I believe it's over $9 billion for New Jersey to support resilient infrastructure. Nationwide, this option could also raise over $200 billion across the nation. So I just want to leave with that with a few things, few tidbits of food for thought to think about the challenges and the opportunities ahead for New Jersey before we dive into the specifics of what New Jersey is currently doing and what's on the road ahead for New Jersey in this critical moment. And as I transition over to introducing our special guest, Nick, I also want to encourage you to sign up for future events that we will have in this series, and I will pull this QR code up again so that you can join our mailing list and hear about upcoming events that we will have, highlighting the work that's being done to build resilience in the state. So with that, I am very excited to introduce New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer, Nick Angarone, who really doesn't need much of an introduction because he's actually about to tell us about all the great work that he and his team are working on in the state. So thank you so much, Nick, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Joanna. All right. So good evening, everybody. I'm Nick Angarone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer, and I also manage the Office of Climate Resilience at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. In my role as Chief Resilience Officer, I am also the Vice Chair of New Jersey's Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, which brings together 26 state agencies and departments to coordinate statewide policy around climate resilience. Tonight, I'm going to give you a brief overview of my office's work to support community and climate resilience in New Jersey. There's 3 things that I hope you take away from this. One, I want you to understand some of the work we're doing. It's important. It's helping our communities, and I'm quite proud of the work. Second, we are doing what my commissioner likes to call the unsexy planning work that is critical to identifying the right projects in the right places, and importantly, co-developed with the communities. You'll see that there's no lack of impactful projects. There is, however, a lack of funding. Finally, I hope you'll see by the end of the evening that this is working, right? We are seeing successes, and if anything, we need to double down on these efforts. So first, the foundation of our work, at least since the latter half of 2019, has been Executive Order 89. Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 89 that, among many things, important things, established my position as Chief Resilience Officer, the Interagency Council, and what is now the Office of Climate Resilience at DEP, who staff and support this work. EO 89 directed the development of two foundational reports. The first being the Scientific Report on Climate Change, a comprehensive assessment of climate science, data, and projections specific to New Jersey. We also regularly update the report as new science becomes available and have done so multiple times. The scientific report serves as the basis for most everything that we do, but also in particular for the climate change resilience strategy. This strategy was developed through the Interagency Council, is a policy framework that identifies over 125 actions for state agencies and departments. Importantly, it also defined what climate resilience means for New Jersey, right? And that is not that we just bounce back from climate impacts, from disasters, but that we bounce forward. Like the scientific report, we regularly reevaluate and update the strategy. We released a summary of the state's progress on resilience action in 2023. And last year, we released an action plan specifically around the impacts of extreme heat on our communities. All of our resilience work is based on the direction or consistent with the direction laid out in that strategy. And to do that, we rely almost wholly on federal funding. We rely heavily on a few specific federal grant programs, kind of annual individual awards, and some post-disaster work to fund most of the critical resilience programs in New Jersey, certainly all the work that my office does, including the Blue Acres program and Resilient NJ, both of which I will talk about tonight. Every funding source that you see here, and some of the specific projects identified here, is likely threatened at the federal level right now, which will leave a massive funding gap for resilience activities in New Jersey. All right. Resilient NJ is one of the programs that is heavily dependent on federal funding, both for its continuation and expansion, as well as for implementation of the projects that result from it. Resilient NJ is our flagship resilience planning program that began with 4 regions after Hurricane Sandy, which are shown in blue on the map. The regional planning program pairs multi-municipal regions with a qualified consultant team who work collaboratively to assess the region's vulnerability, understand the community's vision for their future, and ultimately develop a resilience action plan that melds those two aspects together. This process involves extensive and iterative community engagement. Right. Since those 4 initial regions, we've expanded the program to offer similar technical assistance to individual municipalities, particularly in light of the 2021 update to New Jersey's municipal land use law that requires a town to conduct a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. It's a mouthful, when updating their municipal land use element. Our Resilient NJ Municipal Assistance Program supports municipalities conduct those CCRHDAs and uses it as a basis for developing resilience action plans. Right, with funding so limited, right, and with 564 individual municipalities in New Jersey, all of whom need assistance, we've developed multiple tools, guidance documents, and resources for municipalities to conduct their own planning, since we don't have that level of resources to help all of them. The foundation of the Resilient NJ action plans is a comprehensive risk assessment. Each planning team assesses climate hazards both today and as far out as 2100. While flooding is obviously in New Jersey the most significant hazard that we assess, we also look at hazards like extreme heat and worsening air quality and such. The flooding events that we model include sea level rise, fluvial and pluvial flooding, as well as another Sandy-like storm in the future. The vulnerability assessments performed just for those 4 original regions based on projected conditions in 2070 showed that a Sandy-like storm would result in over $45 billion in impacts across those 4 regions, right? Note that the actual impacts of Sandy in 2012 were $30 billion across the entire state. The risk assessments help us understand risk and vulnerability in these communities, in these regions, right? But it's broader than that, right? Developing a resilience action plan requires understanding the broader context of the region, right? And the 4 regions that we worked with here are very diverse, right? In most aspects, right? Everything from kind of geographic to geologic to socioeconomic, right? The number of residents, the density, the amount of infrastructure, all extremely diverse. And that context helped shape the priorities that the region identified for themselves, for their future, and the types of solutions appropriate for those regions. Right? And based on the unique vulnerabilities of the region and the municipalities and their vision for the future, we work collaboratively to develop a resilience action plan that addresses those needs. The action plan is comprised of various solutions that include not just physical capital projects, but also community planning, outreach, education, and workforce development as well. I'm going to go through quickly some examples from each of those 4 regions. All right, so in the Northeast New Jersey region, there were 74 capital projects recommended in the plan. An additional 27 non-physical actions that change the way we work together, right? Improving policy and governance, supporting outreach, education and capacity building, right? Enhanced services and programs, emergency preparedness and response. And for all of these regions, calculating how much those efforts cost is difficult, but also was at a planning project at the scale was we were not going to be able to go into the level of detail for each of those actions, but we did, the consultant team did provide a rough cost range for each action, and in the case of the NENJ plan, they did price out an estimated cost for each action, and so here in this plan, the total estimated upfront cost of implementing actions was about $12.5 billion, right? Which is greater than the region's estimate of damages, less than the estimate of region's damages from a Sandy-like event, which they estimated to be about $30 billion. This is, NENJ developed several high-level project concepts for each of the 4 municipalities in the region. The one on your screen here shows concepts for Bayonne, which reflect the unique challenges and opportunities in the area, such as industrialization and redevelopment. Protecting industrial areas is important to the regional economy and important to prevent environmental impacts to Bayonne residents. But the actions need to be sensitive to the challenges of developing infrastructure on contaminated sites. In the second region, the Raritan River Bay communities, this map is tilted a bit, but this is the municipalities in Middlesex County on Raritan Bay, right? And so there are a total of 160 actions in this plan, 141 of which addressed flooding, right? Policy and governance, physical and nature-based infrastructure strategies, as well as outreach, education, and capacity building. 59 of those actions could be advanced within the next 3 years. And then about the next 2/3 of them would need to be over a longer period of time, right? But this identifies for us that there are things that we can do now with support and resources we can do now, but we would need to continue to do over the next decade. This is an example of a restoration and redevelopment site on Nose Creek. It's a really good example of a green-gray project with resilience, restoration, and economic development value. right? Nose Creek is a tidal inlet in Carteret that was once a much more extensive waterway. The creek and surrounding wetlands were filled in to enable the urban development of the borough. And today, the culverted creek is a major pathway for coastal flooding, and the surrounding watershed is low-lying, leading to frequent ponding and flooding from heavy rain events, right, particularly at high tide. With climate change, the risk of flooding in this area is expected to increase. Right, this site in particular is part of a local redevelopment plan, which gives the local government additional authorities to kind of be creative and innovative and make those requirements beyond kind of normal zoning. In this case, the resilience strategies in this proposed projects combine coastal flood barriers, resilient redevelopment, and multi-benefit stormwater storage on publicly owned land. They not only reduce flood risk to existing residents, community facilities, and important commercial assets, but also enhance recreational amenities, right? Increasing multimodal connectivity and provide economic development opportunities for this entire watershed. The third region was the 6 municipalities on Long Beach Island, LBI. Right, so this plan includes 64 actions, right? And those foundational actions around coordination and regulatory changes and funding. They focused a lot on capacity building, policy and regulatory changes. There was also a focus on improving mobility and emergency management, right? Such as floodproofing, elevating streets, and an emergency management hub. What I was most pleased to see, right, I do work for the Department of Environmental Protection, was there was a strong focus on nature-based solutions, right? Everything from salt marsh restoration and expansion to Bay Island restoration and enhancement and beneficial use of dredge material. So the example here, this is Taylor Park in Beach Haven on LBI. And through this planning process with the communities, right, they worked with them to identify how they would like to kind of see the park, greened, if you will. And that included things like permeable parking and rain gardens, a Taylor Avenue road diet, turning Taylor Park into a resilience park, right? Not dissimilar from those that Caleb Stratton talked about last month, if you were able to participate in the first webinar in this series, as well as living shorelines and connected stormwater management systems. Right, this is again a comprehensive plan for this area that has significant resilience, recreational, and community value. And the fourth region was the Atlantic County Coastal Region. So this is communities surrounding Atlantic City. In the ACCR region, there were 22 actions that addressed shoreline protection, power and communication, right, transportation and access, stormwater management, and equitable economic development, right, recognizing the significant number of vulnerable populations and public facilities here. One of those such examples is in Gardner's Park, or Gardner's Basin Park and the Atlantic City Aquarium, right? They're located in the northeast of the city, adjacent to Absecon Inlet. If you can picture the map, this area attracts over 100,000 visitors every year, but is an opportunity area for redevelopment into a mixed-use visitor destination with the inclusion of resilience measures. So as I noted, we also worked with some individual municipalities, and I'm just going to kind of go through real quick here some matrices and lists of projects in Upper Township, in Cape May County, examples of those identified in Stafford Township in Ocean County, and those in Ocean Township in Ocean County. Again, right, there's no lack of projects that need to be implemented throughout our municipalities in New Jersey. So I should also talk about New Jersey's Blue Acres program, right, which again is primarily resourced by federal funds, but does have some level of obligated state funding every year. If you're not aware of Blue Acres, right, it's a voluntary floodplain buyout program, meaning that the state will purchase homes from willing sellers in the floodplain, and then return that land to its natural state to act as, natural flood storage. The program has been around since 1995, but it's historically been kind of a reactive program, right? Buying out properties after there's been an event, after there's been a disaster. And to be clear, this remains an important and critical aspect of the program, right? It has been and continues to be extremely active in post-Ida disaster relief efforts, for example, right? But we also acknowledge that a better solution is to get people out of harm's way before, right? There's a disaster before the damage occurs. And so we're, evolving the program to be more proactive, working with homeowners and communities to seek to buy at-risk properties as part of a more comprehensive planning effort, right? Think about it as kind of merging Blue Acres or rolling Blue Acres into that broader planning kind of that we just talked about for Resilient NJ. Aside from the actual buyouts, we've developed a number of resources to help the general public and local decision makers understand flood risk and how buyouts can play a role in mitigating it. And you can find multiple resources on the website, which is up on the screen there. So after Blue Acres acquires a property, after the homeowner has moved on to a safer, more resilient location, the state demolishes all structures, including driveways and fences, on the site, and it belongs to the state in perpetuity, right? It's deed restricted for use as open space for passive recreation, natural flood storage, and wetlands habitat. No residential or commercial use can occur at the site once the state takes ownership. Right? Too often these sites end up just as mowed lawn, right? But that's a significant missed opportunity, right? Blue Acre sites have been used as nature trails, native tree nurseries, and meadow habitat to support local wildlife. The photos that you see on your screen here are all from the Watson-Crampton neighborhood in Woodbridge. And so the Blue Acres program has purchased over 1,200 flood-prone properties, right? Every one of them is an opportunity for restoration, for flood attenuation, right, to become an asset to a community. And so we have started working with some of our partners to produce conceptual designs of what can be done on these properties, right? And this is really to aid in our conversations with communities. So, right, too frequently, people see it as how's it impact, right, the bottom line of the local budget, but really we want to kind of change the conversation to see how these areas can be presented as community assets. And so what you see here is this is an example of a project. I believe this one was in Rahway. Right, and this was developed by Dora Calva, a master's student in the Rutgers Landscape Architecture program, right, and looks to not, kind of bring the site, again, which remember had homes on it, and all the infrastructure associated with it until we did the buyouts, but turn it into kind of that more natural state, add the flood attenuation, and again, act as, kind of the community asset that we want it to be. All right. We're also significantly expanding our reach through a recent $70 million award from NOAA to implement the Building a Climate Ready NJ initiative. This award builds on the strong foundation that we've built in New Jersey in collaboration with many academic and NGO partners, and has a particular focus on assisting disadvantaged and overburdened communities throughout 16 coastal counties. I apologize for the wordy slide here, but there are a lot of projects and activities in this grant, and I wanted to be able to list as many as I could here. But all right, so Building Climate Ready NJ, it builds heavily on the work and collaboration we've built following Hurricane Sandy, and It partners us with 15 organizations across academia, NGOs, and other state agencies who will be working to implement the many aspects of the project. It's important to note that because it's a NOAA award, we are limited to the coast. We got as creative with the definition as possible there to expand our work into 16 counties, right, which only excludes the counties in the northwest part of New Jersey. The webpage, our website, climateready.nj.gov, has a fact sheet that outlines every project and task and partner in this project, and more than is what is listed here. But I'm not going to go through every one of them. What I will say is that right, we are looking to kind of build and implement a resilience program kind of from outreach and education through planning, project design, and all the way through implementation, right? So first, we will be expanding and enhancing our resilience planning opportunities and resources to hopefully increase the number of communities conducting resilience planning work, right? Both on their own and through our existing programs like Resilient NJ. For those of you in this region, you should keep an eye out for announcements in the coming months where we'll have some opportunities to identify and develop those regional plans again. One of the things that I'm excited about, one of the many things I'm excited about in this program is launching an Urban Chief Resilience Officer pilot program. All right, and this program will train and staff Chief Resilience Officers in 6 of New Jersey's largest cities over the life of this 5-year project, right? And hopefully we'll be able to embed resilience principles into local decision making, right? Even if the position, so to ensure that even if the position isn't sustainable past the life of the grant program, that the actions are, right? And we know that good planning begets federal funding, right? But we also know that getting plans or getting projects into the design phase is often the biggest challenge for locals when seeking implementation funding, right? And so to that extent, this project will identify projects from previous planning efforts, right? Many that I've gone over tonight, and bring them into a process to co-design them with the communities, right? So we are establishing a resilience project design pipeline, right? To take those projects that are identified in plans, move them into the design process so that we can get them closer to implementation. We are also developing 2 design projects in New Jersey state parks. One of the phases, a secondary phase of Liberty State Park, as well as a new state park down in Camden, a new waterfront state park down in Camden. We'll continue to identify the tools and information to help communities kind of identify and move projects forward. There are also multiple implementation projects in this award, including marsh restoration at the Sawmill Creek Watershed Management Area in the Meadowlands, the installation of up to 60 neighborhood scale green infrastructure, stormwater green infrastructure projects in Perth Amboy, Newark, and Patterson, and the construction of a waterfront park in Little Ferry that was stemmed from the Rebuild by Design Meadowlands project that Joanna mentioned earlier. There is also an extensive education, engagement, and job trainings offerings through what we are calling New Jersey Educate. Education, climate awareness, training, and engagement. I think it's a clever acronym. These on-the-ground efforts are largely being led by our NGO partners, including our 3 national estuary programs in New Jersey, the Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve. Rutgers University will be leading a K-12 research practice partnership that will bring resilience education directly to K-12 youth, right, based on New Jersey's climate change curriculum standards, right? And there are specific workforce development and training, job training programs associated with each of the implementation projects throughout. Again, this is something that we're really excited about. It's also going to be a massive undertaking. It just got kicked off this past October, and I encourage everybody to keep an eye on the webpage for updates as this program moves forward. So I think, right, I've gone through a lot of the plans and activities of the programs that I implement in my office. And there are numerous success stories here, right? All told, in the last few years alone, actually, I think since 2021, since IDA, effectively, we have brought in over $200 million in additional federal funding, right? And that's been over 25 million of that has been specifically to implement the projects identified in those resilient NJ plans, right? I'm a planner. I love planning. I think it's fun. I think it's critically important. But if those plans sit on a shelf, they have no value. What we have done here is not only done the good planning work, but have provided the assistance to those communities to develop and apply for federal funding, and again, bringing in over $25 million of implementation funds, right? All of the work that we've done has kind of led up to that, $72 million award from NOAA. Blue Acres program has brought in over $100 million for buyouts of flood-prone properties. We have other smaller awards, such as through the Department of Defense Readiness and Environmental Protection Initiative, REPI, that implements resilience projects in and around military installations. We have other smaller implementation awards through NOAA for restoration of Blue Acre sites down on the Delaware Bay Shore, for the installation of oyster reefs on the Molucca River, right? It's a very broad program, and again, quite pleased with how it's all going. But again, it is all dependent on federal funds. Worse, the vast majority of the work in resilience work in New Jersey has come through federal disaster funding, right? That's not really how we want to operate. It shouldn't be how we operate, right? To wait until after there's been a disaster to make the investments to protect us from the next one, right? We have multiple Army Corps projects, studies ongoing in New Jersey, right? And, they've been going on for close to 10 years now. And in some cases, right, we're finding that we don't have the right cost benefit analysis to build the projects that they've actually been studying. Is that the way that we want to identify and implement our projects in New Jersey? Anyone on this webinar want to wait for this federal government to come to our rescue? That does not seem like a sustainable path forward. Or should New Jersey take control of its future and invest in climate resilience? We are one of the few states on the East Coast that does not provide a regular, stable funding source to support the actions that we need to make our communities, our ecological systems, and our economy resilient to climate change. We know that climate resilience projects have a significant return on investment, right? This stat at the bottom, right? Every dollar that we spend on resilience, on climate resilience and preparedness, saves communities $13, right? That comes from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, right? Not a bunch of tree huggers. This is people who are looking at, protection and advancement of our economy, right? So we know that this is a good investment. New Jersey needs a stable source of funding to support state and local investment in climate resilience. I'm personally agnostic as to how we get there. Joanna provided some examples, but New Jersey is not going to be resilient unless we make those investments. That is some of the information where you can follow us on social media and our website. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nick. This is so incredibly informative. And, I think we always get this question about what can we do with resilient infrastructure funding, or what do resilient infrastructure projects look like? And you just gave us such an amazing catalog of examples of the different types of projects that can happen at different typologies and geographies at different scales. And it's really exciting to see all the work that New Jersey has underway. So with that, I do want to turn it now over to Kate Boicourt, who has joined us to join with you in a conversation and then to open up the Q&A that will be for our audience. So if you're beginning to have burning questions, please do put them in the chat. Kate leads the New York, New Jersey team at EDF's Climate Resilient Coasts and Watersheds program, and this team works to foster partnerships to collectively advocate for comprehensive, evidence-based and equitable policies and investments that build resilience for all in New York, New Jersey, and beyond. And recently, her team has been working on policy development at the intersection of the climate and housing crisis, developing measurable resilience indicators, and developing and advocating for governance and funding solutions to address climate impacts. So we are really excited to have you two in conversation with each other. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Johanna, and thank you for having me. And hi, Nick. That was pretty inspiring. I feel like, you know, when I see how much you've done in the past 13 years, it's very astounding. And it's also, then I also sort of see at the end of the slide presentation the list of unfunded projects that you've got sort of ready to go. While I might live in New York City, it's no secret that I'm a New Jersey fan. I brag about the state all the time because I think you all are really leading. But I'm also scared about the impact of federal funding losses with no replacement. And I know that's the theme of our conversation today. I'm wondering if you can kind of anchor us a little bit in terms of thinking about the real on the ground impacts. If we lose that federal funding, we don't have a replacement source. What does that actually look like? How do people feel it? What does or does not happen?
And so the short answer, right, is everything that I just talked about for 20 minutes doesn't happen. Right, depending on some of the decisions at the federal level, right, whether they kind of try to claw back kind of the projects and the funding that we've identified, or whether they just halt any additional funding, right, which at a minimum, I think we're all expecting, right, that the federal spigot is being turned off, right? We've been quite lucky to have, you know, a good amount of funding coming from the feds over the last few years from IRA and BIL, right? But and the projects that I went over tonight, right? Those are just the things that come out of my office, right? There's any number of additional projects and activities that are flowing, you know, to individual municipalities through like the Office of Emergency Management, through the Division of New Jersey Department of Consumer Affairs, right? I don't have the number off the top of my head, but you know, the Office of Emergency Management identified I think over $65 million in additional infrastructure projects that are also funded just through FEMA, right? So there's a significant impact to New Jersey if we are unable to implement those projects, right? And we don't have to just imagine what happens if we experience another disaster level event, right? We've experienced, you know, Sandy back in 2012, you know, the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida, right, in 2021, right? We have it in recent memory, kind of what those disasters look like, but we also see events that don't kind of quite meet the definition of disaster, right, happening more and more regularly, right? Whether that is, you know, 3 flooding events over a 6-week period up in the Passaic Basin in North Jersey, whether that is, you know, the ongoing drought. New Jersey is still in a drought despite, you know, recent precipitation, right? At one point this past fall, we saw a 1,500% increase in forest fires, right? These events are becoming more extreme and more frequent, and you know, are starting to have a significant impact on communities and people's lives and livelihood.
Yeah, and I think, everybody here probably can share some experience to some degree, whether it's something, like interrupting your way to work or actually something more serious. Um, one thing you didn't talk about as much, but I've just been really impressed by the state doing is one of the most impactful, but also hard to do changes that we can make is how and where we build so that we don't perpetuate our relationship with risk. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the state has been doing in that regard with land use rules and also the significance of that.
Sure. So New Jersey has been undergoing for a few years now. And I mentioned a couple acronyms, but we like our acronyms in New Jersey. Kind of going through a process to update our land use regulations, generally referred to as NJ Pact, protecting against climate threats. And that on the land use and resilience side, that has kind of been a two-pronged effort. So first, I think it was back in 23 now. I got time doesn't quite align for me anymore as it used to, but back in 23, we adopted the inland flood protection rules. And these were, generally speaking, updates to our Flood Hazard Area Control Act regs, which, if I vastly oversimplify, took the precipitation data that we have that projects what extreme precipitation events look like out through the end of the century, and incorporates that into our flood hazard rules and our stormwater rules. And so the result of that was effectively, in a floodplain in New Jersey, right, you had to build X feet high based on kind of the projected flood. And what that did, what incorporation of that data did, was effectively raise that level for elevations 3 feet, which, for what it's worth, aligned very well with what we saw the flooding from Ida. But it also extended that out, right, to kind of where it meets kind of the geography, right? And so effectively designs a new floodplain. It also, right, in your stormwater management, you now have to also account for that increased precipitation and runoff, right? Both for flooding value, flooding resilience, but also for the water quality values. And that has largely been, right, the inland flood protection rules. On the coastal side, we are currently have rules proposed. This is the Resilient Environments and Landscapes rule, because climate change is real. Like I said, we like our acronyms. And again, what this does is kind of, again, take the most current science, best available science that we have on sea level rise, and incorporate that into our regs. So what New Jersey projects is that by the end of the century, we are likely to see 5 feet of sea level rise, right? And that is based on a year 2000 baseline. So we've already seen some of this. And what the rules do, again, two primary things, is, again, they require the additional elevation in our flood prone areas of 5 feet, right? So that also then extends the area of, the floodplain or the regulatory floodplain. And so there's a lot of, I will say, misinformation and disinformation about what that does, right? But it is consistent with the true definition of resilience, right? It help these people and communities bounce back to where they were, right, safer and better than they were before the event. The other thing it does is it looks at areas that are going to be inundated just by sea level rise, right? Not a storm, but every day this area is going to be inundated. And it defines these areas as inundation risk zones. And in these areas, you're required to effectively do a site-specific vulnerability assessment and take appropriate measures to make any development that occurs there, more resilient to that flooding. And so these regs do not stop development from occurring. They just add additional safety standards to ensure that our people, our communities, our investments in these areas are more resilient to what the science tells us is coming at us.
I know that if I'm buying a home or renting somewhere, if it's past 2025, I'm going to feel a little better about it because I know it has to go through that process. So as somebody that's thinking about that stuff when I figure out where I want to live, that's kind of important, right? So I think that hits home to folks.
And Kate, I want
Yep,
to point people to the website for this because
sure.
I mean, as I mentioned, there's a lot of kind of bad information out there. But if you go to dep.nj.gov/NJReal, and we can put this in the chat, but there is all the baseline information about the rules is there, including the underlying science, as well as kind of myths and facts about what the rules do and don't do.
Awesome. I don't know if Judy or Johanna, we might be able to paste that in the chat. I'm gonna start going to the audience questions because we have a bunch of those, even though I have more for you. This one is actually, excuse me, I think for Johanna. So I might kind of steer it towards you. I think we already answered part of Renee's question, except that will slides be available? There will be a recording. But I'm gonna bundle Renee and Ken's questions, both sort of, do you support and promote? Did you look at the New Jersey Climate Superfund Act? We know the New York one just passed. And then also, how is the 2% surcharge being perceived?
Yeah, those are great questions. I would also add, we are similar to Nick, agnostic to the exact type of infrastructure funding source that gets implemented, but do have some reasons behind supporting some a bit more adamantly than others. I think that the Climate Superfund Acts that we're seeing in other states are currently facing really large uphill legal battles. And so we're likely to see those get drawn out in the courts for a long period of time. And we need this to happen immediately. We need this infrastructure funding as soon as possible. And what we like about the insurance surcharge, one is that it doesn't back you into a certain number. And you can actually, by leveraging a percentage, you can have a sustainable long-term source of funding. It's also progressive in that those who are likely to have more property and casualty insurance because they have more homes or cars or boats are likely to have more insurance and therefore pay a little bit more into this than the lower income households who may not have insurance or as much insurance. And just to note that currently insurance prices are skyrocketing, but you're not getting any risk reduction from those rises in costs. You're just getting more expensive insurance. And so what we want to see is a small surcharge that does increase costs a little bit, but actually goes directly into mitigating risk. And just anecdotally, when we modeled this out for New York State, the average price to the policyholder was about $2. So we don't believe it would be an insurmountable charge, but it would go directly into building resilient infrastructure.
Thank you, Johanna. And in some cases, in some of these projects, I don't want to say all, but you're actually getting drawn out of the floodplain, right? So there is that shift in cost. I want to just bring up a question from Stephanie Holtzman, which is a great one. How are other states doing it? Where does their funding come from besides federal funding? Because every state relies on federal funding, y'all.
Right, every state was certainly using some level of federal funding. We've not done a detailed analysis of every state how they fund it. We have done tried to do that with a few states, and the short answer is, which may not surprise people who know state government very well, is because it's happened like over a long period of periods of years and period of administrations, and through different kind of acts and bond acts, it's not a straightforward answer, right? And to some extent, the institutional memory might actually be gone. But generally speaking, right, and Joanna kind of shared a table at part of her presentation at the beginning, kind of where some of those states, right, went through bond acts, right, and so you're either bringing that through some level of some specific tax, or which is directly from their general fund. I'll just say, as an example, New Jersey has a corporate business tax where there's a small portion of it that's constitutionally obligated. That part of that funds New Jersey's Blue Acres program, right? So we've had a range of kind of $5 million to $24 million per year come to Blue Acres over the last few years. So again, that's just an example of one way to do that.
All right, that's super, super helpful. I'm curious if maybe I don't know if this might be a Johanna question too, but if you have any sense of what the timing might be to get some sort of, if you were going to do a resilience bond on the ballot, do you have a quick answer to that one?
I can chime in a little bit and just say that I think it's really plausible. A former Governor Cuomo in New York actually ran with this on the ballot because it had so much voter support. So it was very much something that he was championing during an election year, and voters did turn out for it. And I would say then it was actually taken off during COVID and then put back on the ballot, passed by the legislature about 3 times because of a lot of other things that were happening around COVID. And Governor Hochul raised it from an initial $3 billion to 4.3. So again, you have another representative who knew that this would come with a lot of really strong voter support.
And then California eclipsed us by doing 10 billion. So it's all possible. These are 2 really quick questions. Folks are kind of trying to understand whether they're involved in ecological design, maybe they're a consultant, or if they're an artist. I've seen some great grant opportunities from New Jersey DP, just how to keep in touch with either getting involved in Resilient NJ or grant opportunities.
So the art projects, and I think I saw one of our formerly funded artists. So we have a recurring arts grant program that is funded through our annual Coastal Zone Management Award from NOAA. We do this in partnership with the New Jersey Arts Council. There is right now an open funding opportunity. I think it might just be about to close. But what this does is it provides grant funding to local community-based organizations, and then connects them with an artist. The artist produces an art installation of some sort, right? We've had a range from kind of dances to sculpture to paintings, and then builds a kind of a community event around that, right? As a way to kind of communicate that the increasing vulnerability of our coast. As for kind of keeping track of everything we're doing, right? I've identified multiple fundings or multiple websites. I will share the slides, but we have a regular newsletter that you can sign up for that announces all of this, all of our work, and provides updates. I think there was a question about how to get involved in design, and what I say is contact me later. And the design pipeline process that I talked about is being led by a New Jersey Sea Grant, one of our partners, and a number of academic groups. So I think getting involved through that, and with our New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative, which is a group of nonprofit and for-profit entities, all focused on coastal resilience, is another way to get a great way to get involved.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think it's back to you, Johanna, to close us out, and thanks all for attending.
Yes, thank you both so much. This was such an interesting conversation, incredibly informative, and I'm really glad we have so many resources to plug viewers into. After tonight's event, we will, within the next couple of days, share back the recording with you all, as well as the presentations and resources shared during the meeting. And we really encourage you to sign up for our